Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for just waking us up this morning, Lord, allowing us to get here safe and secure, Lord. Lord, we thank you for this event, this 4th annual Young Scholars Martin Luther King Day of Service, Heavenly Father, Lord. We thank you for all our family and friends, community leaders and so forth that was able to come out this morning and sharing this event with us, Heavenly Father, Lord. Lord, we just thank you that you allowed us to be here on another day of service, Lord, but for us to work together as one, Lord. Work together as one, Lord. There's a lot of hatred things going on in this world, Lord, but we all love each other, Lord, because that's what it's all about, Lord. And that's what Dr. King wanted, Heavenly Father, Lord. So we thank you for that, Heavenly Father, Lord. We just thank you for allowing these young scholars to go out here today and do a great thing, Lord. We thank you for people that donated to this cause, Lord, as far as the food and so forth, Lord. We thank you for everyone that's involved. We thank you for Miss McGuire, Lord. We thank you for her, Heavenly Father, Lord. For she's an awesome person, Lord. We thank you for her. We thank you for our families and friends, Lord. And we just thank you for everyone, Lord. We ask that you bless this day, bless this service, Lord, and bless everyone that's going to go up here and perform. In Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen, amen, amen. Amen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're going to get this program started.
Thank you for that meaningful blessing, Coach Rob. I'm Gloria Lambrano Torres, President of the Young Scholars. We welcome you to our 4th annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Diversity. Today we reflect upon Dr. King's legacy and impact his dreams in our current society. We acknowledge with gratitude that many strides have been made in regards to civil rights. However, we must still examine the ideals of freedom, and how the ideals of freedom is often realized differently and unequally for a number of marginalized groups in our country.
In Dr. King's famous speech, he stated, "This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children." Today's theme is to apply Dr. King's dream to all members of society, whether it be a member of the LGBTQ community struggling to find acceptance and human decency, a hard-working, undocumented student dreaming of a bright future, or a child in a Title I school unable to get an equal education simply because their geography determines their opportunity.
Today, in honor of Dr. King and all those who fought for justice besides him, we speak out against discrimination that remains. However, we also pay tribute and celebrate how our school and the greater community of Norristown has embraced true diversity and continues to push for change.
Giving back and loving one another regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, language, or other differences would have made Dr. King proud. Students who recognize the full value of their education is a right that Dr. King fought for. These examples are just a small part of the amazing everyday successes that occur in our community.
The Gay Straight Alliance celebrates diversity up to sexual orientation and ensures that the staff and students are educated on issues important to the LGBTQ community. The National Honor Society acknowledges hard work of students with a GPA of 3.5 or higher and having completed several hours of community service. Having access to an equal and elite education is the right that Dr. King fought for. Students who take full advantage of what our high school has to offer honor his memory.
All right, now prepare yourself to be stunned by the Norristown Area High School Step Team.
I can see like
are history. Say it again, y'all. We are history.
All right, one more time. Norristown Area High School 17. So this is their second performance, and if you were at our Thanksgiving dinner, you saw their breakout, but they have no adult coach. They're under the leadership of Matthew McCraig, David Hunt, and Miss Garman is kind enough to watch them in the third floor stair hall. We have no space to practice, nothing. Resourceful as always, coming from our All right, girls. The agenda for today will cover
The agenda for today will uncover how you can be part of something special. Each of you plays an important part in our community, and today you will surely find a way you can make a difference. Our goal is for you to walk away from today's event and reflect on your own role in society. How can you realize your responsibility in regard to taking a stance against intolerance? What will you do to pay forward kindness? How can you make your positive mark on the world? Dr. King encourages us with his words. As we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back.
Okay, so we're going to begin our breakout sessions, and we have a ton of exciting breakout sessions this year. When you arrived, some of you were given a sheet. If you were already here helping us set up, you might not have gotten a sheet. But if you did get a sheet, you're going to look and see that by each of your breakout sessions, you have a number. And we're kind of just going to meet informally in each of these stations. So, breakout session with Thaddeus, PA. All right. Thad, why don't you go over there? And if you're interested or if you signed up for already, Thad's going to discuss his experiences at an HBCU. He graduated last year. He attends Bowie State. He currently has a 4.0. Great success here at Norristown. So, over here, set up. Girls, why don't you go? And another breakout session is led by the Gay Straight Alliance. Do you want to set up like kind of a little bit further from that? And who's ever interested in going to that breakout session first is welcome to join that one first. Principal Ross, tall guy in the back. If you want to lead people over here, so Principal Ross is doing a presentation about diversity in secondary schools as well as racism in the discipline system. So that's a really interesting topic. Whoever wants to go over there, if you signed up for that one first, why don't you guys go over there? This group. Jody Ann Campbell, another recent graduate. Jody Ann is working with the junior city council right now, right, in Norristown.
Hey, girl.
And as you know, she did self-publish her own book. We already had that book signing. And Jody today is going to talk about the importance of voting. Joe, do you want to come over here in the back? All right. And we also have Unidad is doing a performance today. Is that you guys back there?
So who can tell me Brown versus the Board of Education? What's that all about? Okay. Speak up a little bit. Okay, in schools, right? So in America, right, you know, we all know we went through slavery, and then after slavery, we were followed by the Jim Crow era. And the Jim Crow era was all about, you know, supposedly separate but equal, right? And Brown versus the Board of Education is the landmark Supreme Court ruling that says there's no such thing as separate but equal. You know, separate schools means unequal schools. However, we sometimes think that when that happened, that schools just magically became like the one that we have here today, right, where everybody comes together. And that definitely is not the case. So sometimes on a day like today, we think about Dr. King, who unfortunately his life was cut short, and we have this tendency to think, especially if you're younger, that the dream of Dr. King is something from the past, right? That the civil rights movement was something from long ago. So Ruby Bridges, who was the first, at 6 years old, she was the first African-American student in her southern all-white school. And so at 6 years old, she had to be escorted to class every day for a year by her mother and by the National Guard, by the Army, right? Now that seems like something that would happen a lifetime ago, except Ruby Bridges is only 2 years older than my dad. She is 63 years old. So we tend to think of this in terms of history, but if we want to know why, race in America is still such a big topic, it's because the wrongs of the past and the wrongs of today are connected, right? So, if you're Ruby Bridges and you're 63 years old, she's going to spend January 31st, she'll be at Niagara University giving a speech. Well, think about the power. If Martin Luther King's life hadn't been cut short, if he was able to speak to us today, it might help us to realize that this isn't just a day of service, right? We have to keep pushing to fulfill that dream. There is no better place to help fulfill that dream than in school. Because I think, and it's my 15th year working in a school, and I think that as we work in schools, we see that you guys come together in ways that, quite frankly, I told you my dad is only 2 years younger than Ruby Bridges, in ways that my dad's generation did not. And hopefully the generation after you will be even better, even better. So, in order to make this work in schools, right, the dream is not just about racial equality. In so many ways, it's also about socioeconomic equality. It's about making sure that everyone in America has equal opportunity. And when we talk about schools, we talk so much about the importance of an education so that we can all fulfill our own goals and our own dreams. Now, people like me who run schools, we have an important role to play in that. Because if we send you the wrong message when you're kids, we can chase you out of that system. And so if there's one thing that we know in America, it's that schools are very good at a lot of things. We're very good at educating students, but we're also very good at disciplining students, right? And we are far too quick to point out when you fail as opposed to when you succeed. So one of the things that I worked with your teachers, those of you who are students here, one of the things that I worked with your teachers on, and I'm going to ruin a great experience for you, I'll be honest, because we don't have enough time to go through this the way that we should. Has anyone ever heard of a game called Barnga? B-A-R-N-G-A. So, in the beginning of the year, your teachers filled this cafeteria, and they sat down and we had them play cards, right? Anybody ever play cards before? All right, yeah, we all play cards at some point. So they sat down and we told them that it was an exercise about communication. And so they had rules to this game that they'd never played before, quite frankly, because it's kind of a made-up game. And they had to learn the rules in small groups, and then once they learned the rules, they had to play the game in silence because we wanted them to communicate. So they played the game in silence and they worked out the rules to make sure that they knew how to play. Was an ace higher than a 2 or lower than a 2? Was there a trump card? Was there, all these different rules that go into games like I was going to say pinochle, but anybody know what pinochle is? What else? Spades, right? So they played this game, and then after a while, the winner from each group rotated to the next group. And that's when I have fun. So I sit back and I watch them play this game, and you only move to the next table if you won. So you were the best person at that game. And they get to the next table, and what they quickly come to find out is that they don't know the rules. Because the rules at every table are slightly different. Not enough to that you actually know. Okay? So they get to that next table, and maybe at where I learned the game, maybe ace was the highest card, but I go to the next table and ace is the lowest card. So I throw an ace and I think that I win, and I go to grab the cards, and people are like, come on, get your hands out of there, right? And they're taking them, but you're not allowed to talk. So no one explains to me that the rules are different. And for some people, it causes frustration. For some people, it causes embarrassment. For some people, they give up. And some people just quickly figure out what rules are different and they play along. So why did we play this game with your teachers? Well, we play this game with your teachers because so often in schools, the things that we deal with that we think are such a big deal start with little tiny rules, right? And a lot of times these rules are different, not necessarily based on race or culture, ethnicity, or religion. Sometimes just based on the house that we grew up in. And sometimes race, culture, ethnicity, religion, they do have things to play in that. So I always use the example, the school that I worked at before this. The school that I worked at before this had a very diverse population, just like NAHS Town. And there were students in that school who, the way that they were brought up culturally was that they were never to confront an authority figure, which everybody thinks, oh, that sounds so nice, right? Except then, let's say you corrected them for something. Maybe they were taught to never look me in the eyes. Well, that's different than the way that I was brought up, right? So when I was brought up, if my father was correcting me or my mother was correcting me, they would always say, you better look at me. You better look at me. So I go into a school, and if you mess up, not something big, we're not talking about a fight or anything like that. We're talking about, you know, you were a second late to class. And I come up to you and I say, why were you late to my class? And you look at the floor. I could take that as a sign of disrespect. But you were taught not to look me in the eye. You were taught that that is a sign of disrespect. So in trying to respect each other, those little small rules lead to bigger things. Sometimes the way that we react to things, if we don't take a second to pause, can lead us to think about things differently. So that student who, in trying not to confront an authority figure, maybe turns their back for a second, or they suck their teeth, or they lower their eyes. If I take that as a sign of disrespect, then I tend to escalate the situation, right? And now we start talking about something that goes from a student who was a second late to class, which everyone here knows I'm very big on if you go to school here, right? Now it turns into something bigger. Because then if I get agitated, then I can agitate you. And that goes back and forth until now we talk about, you know, two people yelling at each other, and it ends in maybe something like suspension. Anybody here think suspension is a good way to fix a school? Nobody raise your hand. Anybody think suspension is a good way to fix school? If you mess up and I suspend you, is that going to make you a better person? Big troublemaker over here, I want to know. It's true, right? Because a lot of people see a day of suspension as a day of vacation, right? Especially if it's your 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th time being suspended. After a while, you know, I taught psychology once, right? So teaching psychology before I ever had kids, thank goodness. You know, one of the things that we would talk about in that course, we would talk about raising children. They say there's no book on how to raise kids. There is, but I still don't believe it. So they would tell you, you know, the more that you yell at your child, the less effective it is, right? And then parents who are physically aggressive towards their kids. Not because they're like bad people, just because that is how they believe to correct their kids. The first time that you lay hands on a child, the child might learn from it. The second time, they might learn from it. The 5th time, the 6th time, the 7th time, it loses effectiveness. And you have to keep upping the ante. Well, schools are the same way. So if you act up when I suspend you for a day, and then you act up for something else later on and I suspend you for a day, eventually, unless I'm suspending you for 2, 3, 4, 5 days, it doesn't feel like a punishment at all. So, going back to that game that we played with your teachers, the reason that we played that game is to get us to remember that the rules are a little bit different depending on where you grew up. And I don't mean what country you grew up in, I don't mean what town you grew up in, I mean sometimes what house you grew up in. And that we have to realize that being a good person doesn't mean you act the way that we do, right? Because even amongst the teaching staff, we all act differently, right? Not every teacher reacts the way that I would if I got corrected by the principal. So we have to keep that in mind, and that's one of the things that we wanted to work on, was just take that pause. So then we take that a step further, right? There's a big push nationwide to do away with suspension altogether, right? How many of you think that would be a good idea to say, I could never suspend you at all, regardless of what you do? Only one?
And I ain't even listening.
You know, do they still have in-school suspension?
That's what I was thinking, in school.
So, yes and no. So here, we have it, but we don't utilize it that often. And it's a give and take, right? So the school that I was at before, we had in-school suspension all the time. We had someone hired specifically to run in-school suspension. However, we eventually did away with it because in-school suspension the only consequence at that point, if you're acting up in in-school suspension, was to give you an out-of-school suspension. So I got fed up with, by 8 o'clock in the morning, students who didn't want to be in in-school suspension they knew the way to work themselves out of it. But the consequence at that school was if you get thrown out of in-school suspension, you got 3 days of out-of-school suspension. So I eventually thought, why are we doing this? I'm trying to do something that keeps people free. And the fault wasn't just of the kids, right? Because if we had really the right mindset in school suspension, we wouldn't have been kicking the kids out in the first place. So yes, it exists, but no, we don't use it all that often, admittedly. So there is a big push.
Could you ask them why they think?
Yeah, good.
Nobody thinks that getting rid of suspension would be well, it's not all you know, right? See, that's another thing, huh?
Maybe let's ask the same question a different way. If you think, I am of the mindset, if I was king of the world, which I'm often reminded that I'm not, usually by my 2- and 5-year-old daughters. If I was king of the world, and you said, Mr. Roth, are we going to have suspensions or not? I would say yes, we should keep suspensions. But I think there's a lot of problems with suspensions. So if you think that we should, why don't you give me an example of something you should get suspended for? And there's no wrong answers here. Excessive lateness, okay? All right. Excessively late to school, to class, both?
Yeah, both.
Okay. All right. What else?
I'm not really sure how to feel on the topic because I feel like it can be ineffective because some kids purposely want to just so they don't have to come to school. But I also don't really know what the alternative would be. Like I don't know what would replace it.
That is the $1 million question, right? So if you get the right answer to that, write it down, put it in a book, and you're going to be rich, right? Because we're looking for that, right? And we know some alternatives, but how effective are they? So New York City public schools have a big push. New York City, all of California, and the city of Philadelphia. There's a major push to reduce the number of suspensions. I was at a conference about a month and a half ago, and there were folks from one of the schools in Philadelphia, and they were saying that the city of Philadelphia told them, point blank, you need to lower your number of suspensions, and some of the elementary schools said that you cannot suspend a student who is not past grade 3. So the folks that are working in the schools, they struggled with that because they said, if I have 2 second graders who get into a physical fight, what do I do? Because if they just come back to class the next day, then some of their classmates get the message that was okay. Nobody said it was okay, right? So that is the question that schools face. But here's what else we know in schools. The more that I suspend you, the less likely you are to pass. The less likely you are to graduate. And then the more likely you are to not get a high school diploma, but to get an inmate eligibility. Anybody here ever see the documentary 13? It's on Netflix. If you've never seen it, watch it. You see it? It's powerful stuff, right? So 13th is all about maybe the biggest civil rights issue of our day, which is mass incarceration, right? Schools have a major role to play in that. I won't lie to you. I watched that, and I thought about part of my job sometimes is determining whether or not to call the police, to involve Officer Shepard, if a student does something that's unsafe, that breaks the rules. And sometimes it's easy for folks who don't have to be in the room when a student gets into major trouble, when they're being not just suspended, but expelled, arrested. And even that kid, who might be the worst kid in the school, worst, I can tell you from experience, when you're in that room and you watch an officer put handcuffs on that student's wrist, it is heartbreaking. Because what I know when that happens is that I have just changed that kid's life forever. Forever. There is no going back. You don't forget being arrested. You don't. And once you're in the system, you're in the system. So in schools, we have to figure out a way to stop that, what they call the school to prison pipeline, right? Now, a big part of that is keeping you engaged in school. But a big part of that is also how we handle those lower level infractions. If suspensions fixed behavior, we would have no poor behavior in schools, because we know how to suspend. It is very easy. So what we have to figure out is those low level behaviors, those little things where it's a personality clash, or maybe you were taught to handle something differently than I was, and you don't look at me like we talked about in that game, those little rules, they're so important. Because the more that you're suspended, the less successful you're going to be in school. And there's one more thing that we talk about in schools all the time, which is the achievement gap. What's the achievement gap? Anybody ever heard of the achievement gap? If your arms work, raise them up. Miss Knobloch is here, I can get the nurse. Right? Okay. Anybody heard of the achievement gap before? What is the achievement gap?
It's the difference of growth or progress between students. Yeah, sometimes of color.
Sure.
Sometimes even gender differences of who achieves well in certain courses, math, sciences, sometimes they say boys might do better in math than girls or the opposite.
No, you're right. So the achievement gap is a big thing, right? Now you go back to before Brown versus the Board of Education, when we had white students and black students in different schools, right? Now the white students, when there was a new curriculum, when there was a new textbook, when there was a new way to learn math, science, reading, writing, the white schools got it. What did the black schools get? Like the hand-me-downs? They got the hand-me-downs, yeah. They got the books with the bindings falling off. It was old stuff, right? They were getting history textbooks that, one, it might not have even been the right history, because there were some things we just didn't talk about, right? A history textbook written in 1950 probably didn't get too deep into what Jim Crow was like. In some ways, it was left out altogether. So that's what happened. We get new textbooks all the time, right? We invest in all kinds of stuff because there's always new ways to teach things. But in some of our schools, it wasn't the case. Now that still happens today, right? Let's face it. In schools that are in a really wealthy community, when there's a new product, they can get it, right? Need 50 computers to teach this lesson? We'll buy you 50 computers. That's not the case in other places. And a lot of places are kind of in between. So that achievement gap has as much to do with race as it does to do with socioeconomic status. And by that I mean, how much wealth is in your community. So the achievement gap, the good news is, it used to be that the performance on standardized tests. How many of you love standardized tests? Anybody? Everybody love Keystones? You do. Nice. Why do you like that? I'm just curious. You're a test taker, so it works out well for you, right? Yeah. Hey, you use what's to your advantage, right? Absolutely. So when we look at those results on tests, and not just tests, but also graduation rates, attendance rates, all those things, GPA, it has always been historically that white students are here, black students are here, and then historically Hispanic students down here, right? Not that long ago, the dropout rate for Hispanic students in the United States was 50%. Now that is skyrocketing upwards, which is great. Now, I have, and you can take them on your way if you're interested, some printouts, and I actually clogged the color printer, so I don't have as many as I wanted to. But that show the achievement gap is getting smaller, which is nice. So the performance, all students are getting better on these tests, but actually the path upwards is quicker for black students than it is for white students, and quicker for Hispanic students than it is for both. Now, it doesn't mean that the gap is closed yet, but it does mean that we're making
Hey everybody, we're
strides.
going to wrap
So
up
just
in
think
about
about
2 or 3 minutes, and Aaron's Thinking Putty Company has arrived, so they're going to discuss in their breakout session about corporate give back. They're one of the new businesses in Norristown. So just in maybe 2 minutes, I'll come back again and we'll switch, okay?
So real quick, just think about this. If you are a student of color in the United States, it's about 17 out of 100 get suspended nationwide. That number for white students is 4 out of 100. Now think about this. Most suspensions in the United States are for non-violent, non-drug, non-weapon offenses. So most of them are for talking back to your teacher, for cursing in the hallway, if we think about what's the alternative to handling that, not so much the fighting, right? Fights happen, but they don't happen all that much, right? When I first got here, there was this, everybody told me, oh, there's fights all over the place. I got news for you. You know how many fights there were in this building in the month of December, the entire month? 3. 3. Now, I'd love for it to be 0, right? That's our goal. We're going to get there, too. But 3. So that's 3 times I had to suspend people because they got into a fight. You know how many times we suspended people in the month of December? Far more than 3. And most of them were for things that we probably could approach differently. And that's our mission. That's what we got to figure out. Because the better we get at that, the better we get at closing that achievement gap. All right? So, I'm all ears for the ideas that you have. All right? And the last thing I'll say is this. Students of color are far more likely to get in trouble for things, like I said, that are non-violent, that are, you know, simple things.
Is that to say that white students don't talk back? White students
No.
don't curse? White students don't act out in the same way?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. So when I first did that training, that game with my old staff back when I was at Upper Darby, I knew when I first started having that conversation about race, it makes a lot of people very defensive, right? So when we had that conversation, and I knew people were going to say, well, you know, and I said, okay, let's think about things that everybody does. Everybody in a school carries a cell phone, right? Everybody. And then we looked at the numbers, how it broke down, who got in trouble for it. And I will say there, at that time, 75% of our cell phone referrals were for African American students in a school where they made up 47% of the student body. Dress code violations. I will tell you, everybody violated the dress code. It was supposed to be this really strict thing. It wasn't. It was awful. I was so happy when I did away with it, right? You had to have a collar like this. Nobody wore a collar. 81% of the referrals for dress code violations were for African American students. That wasn't because teachers came to school and said, oh, I can't wait to write up my kids. No, it's because of that subconscious bias that happens that unless people like me think about, we just keep perpetuating. All right? I love this stuff. We'll talk about it.
I want to talk to you about 2 experiences, my academic experience and my social experience. So, academically, at Bowie State University, the academic curriculum is like it's very rigorous, and they expect a lot out of you. So I felt like developing good relationships with my professor was really key. Because like if I'm in a class, a few of my classes had 50 plus people in it, and like it's easy for you to get lost. Like you feel like you're like a big fish in a pond or whatever. So it's like, okay, how do I navigate this? So I started to develop good relationships with my professors. I started to get close to them. Like if I ever needed any help with anything, you know what I mean? I would take their number down, I would take their email down if I needed tutoring or whatever. So that really helped me. That really helped me as a student. Because like knowing that you have like that type of relationship with your professor outside the classroom is really essential to that's how I got a 4.0, you know what I mean? And also like my work ethic, but developing good relationships with my professors, that was really key to me, especially during my first semester of college. Because it's not easy, yo. It's really not. Like, I'm coming fresh out of high school, like, I don't really know what to expect. I'm kind of nervous, you know what I mean? So it's like having those people there to help you and guide you in whatever you needed help with was really key. And my social experiences, I'm in a band at Bowie State University, and HBCU bands are like, not only are they the best, but like out on HBCU campus, it's like, that's everything. Literally, like, you're literally the sound, you're literally the heartbeat of the campus, you know what I mean? Like, they, like, people see us marching up and down to the football field and stuff like that. They see us at football games. So socially, I was kind of really fortunate because I didn't have time, I didn't really have a lot of independent time to be like, oh, so maybe I can go to this party or meet up with this person. It was like, nah. I literally do a few things like every day. Wake up, go to class, go eat, go to practice, repeat, study. That's it. You know what I mean? 'Cause we practice from 5 to 10 every day. And that practice regimen really helped me with my study regimen. So
my social experiences helped my academic experiences because they kind of like connected. You know what I mean? So my freshman seminar teacher was actually my advisor for the band. So if I ever needed help with anything in class, etc., I can always just call him, and he'd be like, okay, cool, I understand. Or if we were like out of town and we had an assignment to do for freshman seminar, he'd be like, okay, cool. Because not only was he my professor, but he was my advisor, and he was talking to me about what's next, you know what I mean? And I always thought ahead, and that's why I chose Bowie State University in the first place, because it's an out-of-state school, and me going out of state was really pivotal for me, because like I said in the last breakout session, like going to Bowie State University, like that's really what made me an adult, because I'm not, my parents are 3 hours away, like they're not as close as like if I went to like your science or somewhere like that. Like I can't just call my mom and be like, hey yo mom, I need something. Like no, I have to plan ahead for that, you know what I mean? And me being there and me going through those experiences, you know what I mean, really shaped me and helped me and was pivotal in my growth as a man and an African American man as well, because at HBCU, like we're depicted as African American men in the media, like we're depicted in like a bad light. When you go to HBCU, when you see like, oh wow, he looks like me, she looks like me, and she's after something greater than herself. Like I always tell people, I'm at Bowie State University for a purpose that's greater than me. It's bigger than me, you know what I mean? Like I'm doing this so future generations and my family can be like, wow, he can do it, I can do it too, you know what I mean? And just to see that and to see how African Americans are so successful and being around a lot of African Americans that strive for success, and you all want the same thing, is a powerful thing. It really is. And HBCUs aren't just for African Americans. Like I feel as though every culture should experience the HBCU experience. Because at Bowie State University, I know we're one of the more diverse HBCUs, even though we are 80% African American. Like that other 20% is like everything. Like I met people from all over the country. Like I met somebody from Saudi Arabia, met somebody from Nigeria. I met people from everywhere, and to like hear their experiences and stuff like that, like it really like helped me. I'm like, wow, and understanding their culture and stuff like that. And not only that, people from around the world. I met people from around the country as well. I met some girls from California, met countless people from DC, Baltimore, like everywhere. And we're all a big family, you know what I mean? And that's why I chose to go to Bowie State as well. Like the family atmosphere at HBCU, we're not like, oh yeah, you're white, oh yeah, you're Mexican, no, you can't come here. Everybody comes to Bowie, like everybody, no matter what color you are. And we all just embrace each other, you know what I mean? So that was really key for me, you know what I mean? Just like the fellowship and the family aspect of it really helped me get through this semester. So any of y'all have any questions, comments, concerns?
How was your first week at the college?
My first week?
Yeah, when you first got there.
Well, me, I always say I was kind of like 2 weeks ahead of schedule because I'm in the band. So I got down there August 6th, and then that was fun because like the semester didn't start yet. That was like in the middle of like band camp, so it was
alright, got
it. Yeah, we was like training and stuff like that. But my first week of the semester, that actually went pretty good because I understood what was expected of me. Like I had expectations of myself. I'm like, all right, okay, cool. I can get a 4.0. I can make the dean's list. I said it from day one. So every day I strive to get a 4.0. That's why I developed so many good relationships with my professors. That's why I developed good relationships with my peers, because I said at the end of this semester, I want to say, listen, I finished my first semester of college with a 4.0. And then mid-semester, like midterm time, I was like, okay, it's possible. I got a grade in this class, So all I got to do is this, and I got an A. Say no more. So I did it. You know what I mean? My first week, it was good. It was a lot of getting used to.
Yeah, I bet.
I'll tell you that. A lot of getting used to going to class. I had to really learn quickly that professors, they don't get paid to teach you. Professors get paid to present you information. So it's like if 50% of the people fail that professor's class, that doesn't look bad on the professor, that looks bad on you as a student. you fail because you're paying your hard on, you're paying
Your money.
You
Right.
know what I mean?
Big difference.
Yeah, definitely.
Big difference.
Yeah.
How well did high school, particularly Norristown High, prepare you for college?
It definitely prepared me because I consider Norristown area high school one of the most diverse high schools around. Like you go to school with everybody, black, Latino, Asian, Caucasian, you name it, they're here. You know what I mean? And it really made me understand other people's cultures and other people's like ways of life. And I consider myself like a very open-minded person, so I'm not like, oh, you believe this one? Yeah, I'm just going to like just move that to the side. I'm not going to like take that. And it really made me really understand the importance of understanding other people's cultures and you know what I mean. So yeah, it definitely prepared me because we're so diverse.
Did it academically prepare you?
Norristown? I mean, I would say so in some ways. Yeah, definitely. It definitely academically prepared me because one thing about Norristown, like everybody here, for the most part, everybody here wants something. You know what I mean? Like you're sitting next to people that actually want to do something. Like not everybody in Norristown is just a person that really doesn't want to come to school. They don't really want to like do nothing with their life. Like there's people at this school that actually really want something in life. You know what I mean? And I can definitely say being here at Norristown definitely academically prepared me for good. Anybody else? Questions?
Just like to add, also, when you get to experience college, you'll get to see. I'm a graduate from Delaware State University, and you'll see a lot of difference between high school and it'll help you grow. Just like you have your classes here, what they have is they call them semesters. And it's not what your question that you asked is not like your first week. It should be like your first semester or your first year. Because once you get to that first year, and you may go to school with some of your friends from here, whatever. But the difference you'll see is that if you're more disciplined and want to learn, your friend wants to do a lot of the high school things. You're not going to see that friend too much longer as you travel or being a sophomore, junior, and senior. So the levels, there's different levels too when you go to college. When you become a freshman, you're fresh in, basically what it means, you're fresh in school. You graduated high school, you're on all-time high, oh, I can do this, whatever. But you get a different outcome, you get a different look. It's a different world when you go to college.
Definitely. Especially like I said, especially at HBCU, because like, man, like the culture is so different. Like you hear music blasting, like everybody's just like, especially like that first week of the semester, everybody was going crazy. It's like, all right, bet like the person down next to me, music blasting,
It's
everything.
fun.
Yeah, it is.
It's fun.
Yeah.
But you got to remember what you're there for too.
You gotta definitely like discipline yourself. Like if you're not a disciplined person, yeah, college really isn't gonna.
You're going to just be partying and wasting all your money.
Because you gotta understand, everything is coming out of your own pocket, and that's why like when I look back at it, I'm like, damn, high school wasn't that bad after all. Because like those English textbooks that they got, that's like $160 in college. I'm like, I got this for free in high school. Like, you know what I mean? Like you value so much more once you actually leave high school and go to school. Because like I said, everything is a cost. Everything has a cost on it. Your meal plan, you gotta pay to eat, thousands of dollars. You gotta pay for everything.
I know.
Like here, everything is essentially free. You know what I mean? Like you can go to the library and check out the textbook and not have to pay for it. You know what I mean? So definitely, if you're not a disciplined person, at HBCU, college period, that's not gonna, you know what I mean? But it definitely help you out.
Did you earn scholarships from your high school performance that helped you with college?
At first I didn't, but what happened to me was, it was a kind of like a different situation. Because I didn't go to Booth with the scholarship, but by the end of band camp, I had an $8,000 scholarship from the band. You know what I mean? So me and my band director, we were talking or whatever, and he was like, okay, I put $8,000 in your account. Because he saw that I was actually committed to what I wanted to do. And I was committed to the band, so he was like, here's a scholarship. So I earned the scholarship while I was in school. And I'm still working hard to earn more scholarships because the more money I have, the better I'll be. You know? So,
You get a lot of peer pressure in high school. People saying like, oh, you think you're better now.
Peer pressure in high school? Not really. You know what I mean? I tried to be like a down-to-earth person. I don't think I'm better than nobody. You feel me? Like, I just tried to be cool. You know what I mean? But I don't think, the peer pressure wasn't there. They weren't like, oh, you think you're telling me? Like, nah. I just kind of just tried to like lay low and just
Just push that to the side.
yeah.
Got it to your books. That's what you did.
Definitely.
It's kind of funny because I didn't have peer pressure, but when like all my high school friends saw me, they was like, oh, you going? They knew I was going to college.
Right.
But I didn't get no scholarship or anything. I had to earn my scholarship, which wound up being a full scholarship. But you know, it's your presentation of yourself, of what they think of you.
And that's all about bettering yourself too. Like I realized like me going to Bowie State, like it was gonna better me as a person, better me as an African American man. Like and it was gonna better me as an adult, period. Like I said before, like when I got to Bowie State University, that's when I became an adult. Because now it's like you have to plan out everything. Like you have to plan out, okay, I have to watch clothes here, I have to go eat here, class time here, study here. Like everything is planned out. Like you can't just be like, I'm gonna just wake up this morning, I'm just wing it. Like whatever happens, happens. You can't do that. Because like once you get unorganized in school, like it throws your whole semester off. So I tried to get into a regimen, I tried to get into a strict routine of, okay, I have an 8 a.m. class, cool. Okay, if I really want to eat breakfast, because the way Bowie's breakfast is set up, it's from 7 to 9, and they stop serving the hot breakfast at like 9 o'clock. So, and I had an 8 a.m. class, so I would literally have to get up like 6 o'clock in the morning just to eat breakfast and then go to my 8 a.m. class. That's if I really wanted to eat that day. But like other times I was like just kind of like, you know, have a granola bar up in my dorm or something like that and have some water and then I'd be cool until lunchtime. But yeah, it's definitely, you got to plan everything out. You definitely have to plan everything out. Anything else?
It's movie Drumline. Everybody know Nick Cannon, right?
Oh yeah.
Check out Drumline. And Drumline, don't look at him as the actor, look at how he played the part. He was the best person on the band, but he just didn't have no discipline. And you see the different obstacles that was in his way. Check out that movie, and it'll help. You'll see it in a different light. That's exactly how college is.
Yeah.
That's exactly.
Do you think that being first generation college student is harder for you? Like you're coming back and you're talking to our, to Norristown high school students. But do you think it's harder for you to be in college not knowing what to do or having to learn everything yourself versus having someone kind of share that experience with you beforehand or seeing your parents kind of go through that before?
Right. I would say like being a first generation student, it just gives me more motivation. You know what I mean? Because like I realize I am the first person in my family to experience what I'm experiencing. And like my parents didn't go to college, but it's like they see me and they're like, wow, like everybody is on this journey with me. Like my whole family, like they're experiencing this with me. Since I am first generation and I am the first to go to school, so like everybody is learning together. You know what I mean? Like it really being the first generation, like especially like me personally, it really brought me and my family closer. You know what I mean? Like I said, my parents really didn't experience what I'm experiencing right now. So like when I talk to them on the phone or like when I'm talking to them, they're like, oh wow, so everybody's on this journey together. So I would definitely say it just gives me a lot more motivation. To keep pushing. Because like now I can't stop. Like I got a 4.0. Now the challenge is can you do it again? And I'm challenging my consistency. So I try to look for challenges in everything. But I'm not like, all right, cool, I got a 4.0. It's cool if I get a 3.5 next semester. That's cool, but it's like, nah, I already proved to myself that I can get the 4.0, so why not do it again? And why not strive to be the best? And why not? It's like, if you gotta pass the class, why not pass it with the highest grade? You feel me? You know what I mean? So,
is there one thing that you wish you would have learned in high school that would have helped you adjust or transition, even though you did so well? Is there something thinking back that, wow, I wish I would have learned that in high school that have helped make it easier?
A little bit more emphasis on African Americans.
Okay, guys, we're going to switch in about 2 or 3 minutes.
It is a day that recognizes the value and inequality.
Martin Luther King Day is significant to our group because it is a day that recognizes the value and inequality as human beings. Martin Luther King fought for all citizens' rights, and in our Unidad Club, we still continue to fight for the rights of immigrants, and we try and support the youth population as much as we can, as Latinos and students who are either immigrant or from a family of immigrants. We strive to continue work on Martin Luther King within our school and our community.
What does bicultural mean? Could you guys please take a second and write what you think bicultural means on the sheet of paper? Yellow highlight. You guys need more markers?
Ask away. You have answers.
Just write it anywhere, guys. It really doesn't matter.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. We should record the paper as they write. Like zoom in on their answers.
And then you can make a little montage.
You can make a montage out of their answers to the reporters. Oh my god. Bitcoin is.
Dude, I love Bitcoin. I have attention to Bitcoin.
I have like 0.000000000. Out of the next.
I don't know words.
It's like $1.
Can we start off with this side and can you guys start sharing, please?
I said, like, being bicultural is like respecting more than one culture, multiple cultures.
Gio, do you have anything on biculturalism?
I think it's like just a group of many different cultures coming together, like people like different traditions and different like history and stuff like that.
I like
coming and like respecting each other.
Cool. Victoria, you have any definitions on bicultural?
But it means like having more than one culture, like being open to more than one culture.
Isabel.
Open to more than one culture.
You agree? All right, cool. Kayla?
I said like being surrounded by multiple cultures, like just because we don't necessarily two cultures, you could be surrounded like with your share, like you could be surrounded by two different cultures.
Cool.
Doesn't it mean having two cultures? So that would I mean.
Same as her. Anyone else? Something different?
Justin.
An individual or setting that has an incorporation of two or more cultures.
Anyone else? Okay, so bicultural identity is a condition of being oneself regarding the combination of two cultures. The term can also be defined as biculturalism, which is the presence of two different cultures in the same country or region. As a general term, culture involves the behaviors and belief characteristics of a particular social, ethnic, or age group.
So obviously there's a whole bunch of advantages of being bicultural. For example, you get to learn different skills such as learning a language, cooking, dancing, and you also get to learn more languages. There are also more opportunities you get for building relationships and friendships with other people from both cultures you have, and you can also be open-minded to different cultures. And leading into that, you become more aware, open-minded, and more sympathetic about different cultures. You also get to have a rich array of traditions, and you get to travel between countries.
So you guys could write a couple of advantages of being bicultural, or any disadvantages of being bicultural. You want to whatever you guys want.
And if you're also open to write down like some of your traditions.
Yeah,
Also write down your
traditions.
culture is identity. Culture equals identity.
So when we asked Unidad, they said that culture is the way of life, your beliefs, your behavior, your ethnicity and identification, the language you speak, the art, music, and food you create, your traditions and heritage. It's what defines you, it's your morals, it's your environment, and it's the way you are raised.
For some students, Unidad has always been a club in the school. However, it is only 5 years old. Kenai High School created the first Unidad club, and we were fortunate enough to send a teacher to visit and share the idea. Unidad's mission is to provide support to the Latino students and community in order to be more successful in school, go to the post-secondary school, and increase awareness amongst other groups about immigrants and the rights or lack of rights. It is important that we continue to celebrate diversity in this country at a time when it feels like we're incredibly pulled apart. Ways to incorporate culture into school settings would be for Spirit Weeks, we could have an international celebration.
Create a living museum with multiple countries represented.
Incorporate cuisine into the school language.
School news in different languages.
Have translators in different languages available at conferences.
Host multicultural events promoting community events.
Celebrate different holidays and events representing the cultures within your school.
Host a diversity day. Actually, NAHS Center High School is, our Unidad Club is creating the first diversity day here on April 28th. It's going to be on a Saturday. Every student from the school is welcome. And it's like going to be like this day. And we're going to have breakfast session, and then we're going to have lunch, and then another session. And then we're going to have a community service project, and then we're going to have entertainment at the end.
So come on Saturday, April 28th, guys.
Honestly. These are some things we do and ideas we've had at Narson Air High School. In order to support our bilingual students and build awareness, mention our first diversity day, like Young Scholars Unidad values diversity and biculturalism. And we want to bring our neighboring communities together to have conversations and see that our students have unique experiences that need to be shared in order to break down some of the stereotypes.
And I think Angel Dulce had something to say.
Alright, so there are a number of ways that you can get your parents involved with your education. And some of the things that you can do is have them attend your conferences, and you can even like ask them for like a translator and stuff so they can translate. You can encourage your parents or guardians to set up and check with your emails regularly. Provide paper copies of important school documents to your mail, and create Connect ED Plus in various languages for important events. You can also find out which social media platforms are used by parents and create a bilingual page.
And these are for more student and family effort. When you're eating dinner, make sure you talk about your day and let them know what happened at school. Ask your parents to attend your games and extracurricular events so they know what's happening. Tell your parents to demand information to be sent home in the language that they need. And tell your parents that you're learning and sit somewhere in the house where you can do homework with them and explain it to them as you
do. And the young students involved, because the children are our future. And it becomes with great understanding at an early age on ways of how you can give back to the community and things that you can do to become involved. So no, you don't necessarily have to be involved in politics, but you could be a volunteer just a way as also mentoring to a student or a child. Any way that you can give back would truly be helpful and grateful and appreciated. And at the end of the day, it is a rewarding experience. So thank you, and it's good to see all of you.
I think this is my 3rd year. I missed y'all first one, but I will always be here. But I want to share today about an event that's coming up. And the quote I have on the flyer says, "Our lives begin to end
the day we become silent about things that matter. So, when there's stuff going on in your school, when there's stuff going on in your community that you know that's not right, but you stay quiet about it, you're living an end. Your life is going to an end. It dissipates some. So there's a movement these days that's called restorative justice. How many people have heard of restorative justice? Wow. Wow. We have a big learning curve. Restorative justice just simply, it's a philosophy that we do things with people. When we have a dispute, when we have an argument, when we have a disagreement, we have a tendency to want to talk to other people about it instead of talking to the person who we're involved with. So restorative justice, it relies on the philosophy of solving problems through dialogue between the parties involved in the dispute. But we need volunteers to be trained to be these mediators. Basically, they're circle mediators. People know what a mediator is? Mediators. So restorative justice uses volunteers who are basically mediators. We meet in a circle. Our American Indians, or indigenous people, actually use this practice. Maybe on television, y'all seen old movies where people sat around the circle, sat in a circle around the fire, and they passed a peace pipe. They call it the peace pipe, and they talked around. Well, that's what we do in circles. We sit in a circle, and people use a talking piece, and the person with the talking piece talks. And people who have been in a situation with one another, they share what happens to them. Others who have been involved share how the impact of it has. And you begin to come to an agreement. So I'm looking for some peace ambassadors. What I mean by a peace ambassador, that means somebody that wants to walk the talk, who wants to be a peace ambassador, who wants to be able to resolve differences, who wants to learn how to be a circle keeper. But this thing is deep, y'all. It's no hit and run where you just come in for a half a day and learn it and run back out. You're a circle keeper. Because it's a 3-day process. And that's where I lose people, I understand. But that's how, because it's taken a long time to get to where we are today. Let me back it up. Let me slow it down, actually. I don't want to give y'all too much. But Martin Luther King's journey started how many years ago? What anniversary of his death, of his I Said a Dream speech? 50 years. 50 years. So we've been on this journey for civil rights, for justice, over 50 years. So to undo that, we have to look at history, to how we've gotten to this place of where we're punishing, where we have mass incarceration, where we have school to prison pipeline, how those things were created. So the first day of training goes back to the history of how we've gotten to where we are. Then our second day, you start learning the facilitation, the mediation skills. And then the third day, you practice those. So it's a 3-day training. I'm offering it for free, thanks to the Montgomery County Prevention Initiative has provided us money to offer this training for free. And it's going to be held March the 27th, 28th, 29th, from 11 to 5 p.m. at the Knoxtown Public Library. All right? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Platts. And one more group, we'd like to have the Brothers of Mount Pixa come up and say a few words. This is a group that our own Coach Ra is part of, and they've been working with the scholars now for about 3 or 4 years. Really great community group.
Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Or good morning. Wow. Nice time. My name is Raymond Mitchell. I have a company with me, gentleman Irma Patterson, and gentleman in the back who sponsors this for us every year, your own Brother Hussein, Rashid Hussein. We're part of the Prince Hall Masons of Pennsylvania. Prince Hall was one of the founding African Americans who brought Prince Hall Masonry into Pennsylvania. It's just like when you go to college and you hear about sororities and fraternities and things of that nature. We're just part of an organization that primarily does the same thing. I'm gonna be short. I'm gonna be brief. I'm a little nervous. I didn't know I was gonna have a chance to actually speak. But we just like to introduce ourselves and let you know that we give to our primary objective is charity. And this is one of the things we do for charity, to come out and to participate with the Martin Luther King Day of Service in his honor. I'd like to thank Principal Roth and also to Mrs. McGuire for allowing us to come into your edifice and speak to y'all about Prince Hall Masonry. If there's anything that you would like to talk to us on our behalf, we'll still be here with the rest of whatever ceremonies that you have going on today. We'll be sitting among the audience. Thank you for your time and have a blessed day.
The focus of today is a hopeful approach to the many problems that marginalized people have faced in our society. However, we would be neglecting reality if we did not comment on some brutal injustices that still occur. Dr. King stated, "We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity." I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You've been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Norristown Area High School sophomore Olivia Turner will present an original essay that addresses the work that must still continue.
Mother, growing up you told me not to have my hood up, to keep my pants on correctly, and to always be respectful to the police, no matter how disrespectful they are to me. But Mom, I followed all the rules you put up, and still, I lay in a morgue. My dead body lay limp and cold. My death was ruled an accident, but the body camera will show you that I was calmly walking down the street to a friend's house. When the officer came up to me, he forced me to put my hand on the metal fence in front of me and proceeded to pat me down. Mama, I did everything that man told me to do, but my one fatal mistake was asking me why he was searching me. My scarce, raspy 16-year-old voice said just loud enough, "May I ask why you're searching me, sir?" The cold truths of reality came crashing upon me like rocks, no boulders being thrown at me. The man whipped out his handgun and pulled the trigger so quick I didn't have time to thank God for these memorable 16 years he gave me on this earth. Bang, bang were the last two things I heard. The 2 shots to my head the 2 shots to my brain killed me, and 4 shots in my chest buried the deep distrust and tenuous feelings we have towards our own fellow countrymen. At my funeral, you and the rest of the family cried enough tears to fill an ocean bigger than the one that brought us to this land. My sister's words about my death dripped in bittersweet hatred to the statistic I became a part of, like many of my fellow brothers and sisters. The sweetened part was that I would be in a better place, and hopefully there would be justice for how I fell into the hands of police brutality. But the story doesn't end there, isn't that right, Mama? Those sleepless nights you spent trying to get enough money to hire a good enough lawyer to bring me justice, just for the jury trial to be ruled not guilty. Acquittal is something we don't necessarily hear when one of us is on the stand. But when it's those responsible for the deaths of my fellow brothers and sisters, Mike Brown, Shelley Frey, Miriam Carey, and Eric Garner, and many more, were simply not charged or acquitted. But I must tell you, I am not angry at the man who killed me, because this is not my story, but the story of many African Americans living today. But I can say that I am angry at the unfair justice system, the prejudicial and stereotypical mindset that has and is still being passed around through generations, the blatant ignorance and racism that is the puppet master that controls this country. And most of all, the fact that we cannot be fair and kind to one another simply because of their skin color, sexual orientation, religion, economical status, or even gender. I have lost my hope for this country again. Only this time I will not mourn it. Instead, I will keep marching, I will keep voting, keep pushing for equality of all people, because he had a dream in 1963, and we must not rest until that full dream is fulfilled to its farthest extent. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia, for that incredibly moving piece. Senior Brianna Pollard will now present I Am Diversity by Charles Benefield.
Hi, everyone. I am diversity. Please include me. I'm present in every place you go. Depending on your lens, I'm friend or foe. I am a force to be reckoned with. Like the winds of change, I move. I'm swift. I'm present when two or more are together. If embraced, I can make the good even better. I'm not limited to age, gender, or race. I'm invisible at times and yet all over the place. Don't exclude me due to lack of knowledge. Welcome me like the recruit fresh out of college. Let me take my seat at the table, even though I may be differently able. My experience, my passion, the authentic me can help add value for your company. Learn about me, improve my underrepresentation, and I can provide a competitive edge to your entire nation. I exclude no one, I am strengthened by all. My name is diversity, and yes, I stand tall. Recognize me and keep me in the mix. Together, there's no problem that we cannot fix. I'm your best hope towards true innovation. And to many, I reflect hope and inspiration. Your lives and companies will continue to change. Thus, the need for diversity and inclusion will also remain. Do all that you can to truly embrace me and experience life's fullness totally. I'm the thought lurking behind the unfamiliar face. I'm the ingenuity that helps your team win the race. I'm the solution that came from the odd question that was asked. I stand out in the crowd when I, diversity, am allowed to be unmasked. I am diversity, embrace me and we'll journey far. I'm diversity, include me and we'll reach the shining star. Coupled with inclusion, our lights burn together. Together we are smarter, better and stronger. I am diversity. Yes, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianna. Senior Tyler McKay will now present an original poem.
So I'm going to read a quote, one of Dr. King's famous quotes first. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. I still see darkness. Some reveal it, some don't. I still see darkness in their minds. They evoke. I still see darkness, but I will not fear, because I have hope within me. I have hope that heals. Hope that drives all pain and kills. Kills the wrongful thoughts they bring. They call me a monkey, but I see a king.
Thank you very much, Tyler. And now for our final student presentation, sophomore Aaliyah Walk Benitez will perform a poem, Bravery.
Bravery. In this poem, we are not afraid. In this poem, the aching bi kid who hides their arms under the sleeves won't be sent to conversion therapy by parents who think they are breathing the wrong way. In this poem, the pan boy with a cane doesn't have to worry about how he's going to pay for his surgery. In this poem, the butch lesbian trying to become a mother won't need to be insured the added pain of being forced to bury or cremate her miscarried child. In this poem, Black trans women can walk home by themselves at night not wondering if their bodies will be found cold in the morning. In this poem, two brown men can kiss on the street, and the gentleness of their laughter will not become fonder than the largest mass shooting in history. In this poem, I can stand on the table in the middle of a crowded caf and shout with every decibel of my gay trans male body, I am, I am, I am, I am. I am without anyone wanting to take my humanity from me. In this poem, we are not afraid. Outside of this poem, despite everything, we hold each other close, as tight as we can, then even closer. Outside of this poem, we paint banners, make fists, give embraces, write letters, march on the city streets, break the window shops, and let them know who they're up against.
Let's give a round of applause to all of our student performers today.
As a graduating senior of Norristown Area High School, we have encountered many amazing teachers who have not only imparted their knowledge, but have also acted as an emotional support system. These teachers often sacrifice their time with their own families just to help us. They show up day after day with words of encouragement, and they never give up on us, even as sometimes we lost faith in ourselves. We thank you so much for your kindness, and it will never be forgotten.
Dr. King's words today pushes us to continue moving forward in regards to overcoming obstacles so that all Americans can achieve their dreams. Dr. King stated, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed, let us now wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friends, so that even though we face these difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
To conclude today's event, we welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Akbar Hossain. Akbar truly is a modern-day realization of Dr. King's dream. Akbar, a Norristown Area School District alumni, has been able to achieve phenomenal success in the face of much adversity. Akbar's stories truly inspires us to never give up, to work hard, and to eventually give back. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our very own Mr. Akbar Hossain.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me here with you on this historic day of remembrance and service. I'm excited to be with you for many reasons, but one of the most important reasons is basically it's coming back home for me. I went to the Norristown Area Public School District. I went to Whitehall Elementary School, which is right next door. I went to Stewart Middle School, and then I graduated from here, Norristown Area High School, in 2009. In fact, I actually sat back right there for 4 years when I had lunch in this room. So it's great to be back. You'll learn a little bit about my life and my story in a few minutes, but I wanted to take this time to thank all of the students, the teachers, faculty, and most importantly, the community members and the business members who are here today to make this incredible event happen. Thank you. Thank you for being here. So, Dr. King had a bold outlook on life. And the outlook was that one day his children will live in a world in which their worth would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So before I started thinking about what I wanted to talk about with all of you today, I asked one of my African-American friends, a few of my African-American friends, if they thought that specific part of his dream had become a realization. And this was a conversation that happened about a week ago. And all of them, so I go to law school at University of Pennsylvania. It's my last year. I'm about to graduate. And all of them had these really well-crafted legal answers for what had happened. And essentially saying that somewhat the dream had been realized. But then one of my friends, his answer was a resounding no. There's no way Dr. King's dream had been realized. He said there are too many black men being gunned down on the streets. Politicians are openly talking about Muslim bans. And then we have the KKK openly holding rallies. And all of this is happening on the greatest nation on earth. And how could I, simple kid from law school, think that his dream had been realized? And that is the premise with which I come to you today. I agree with my friend that the work is not complete. But I come to you today to say that we still have advanced a long way since the March on Washington. We have not yet reached the promised land, but the march has begun, and we have significant progress. We have made significant progress towards our path to the promised land. To dismiss the magnitude of the progress and to suggest that little has changed, I think would dishonor the courage and the sacrifice of all of those who paid the ultimate price while they were marching along the side of Dr. King. But it would also be a great dishonor to say to those heroes that the dreams of Dr. King had been realized. Income disparity, high unemployment, and a shrinking middle class, and the police brutality issues, all point towards the fact that millions of Americans are having a hard time meeting the goals of Dr. King. But these facts do not erase the forward movement of the civil rights movement. So the question now for us as a community, and for you, all of you students, as you go off into the community as in your real life as members of the community, is what do we do? How do we continue? And my simple answer to that is we just march on. At the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, which was 2 years ago, President Obama said, "Extraordinary changes happen when ordinary men and women are willing to stand up for the progress they seek." This is our time to create that extraordinary change. And to frame that, I wanted to share with you my story. So I was born in Bangladesh. How many of you know where Bangladesh is? All right, we got some people in the audience. So it's in Southeast Asia. Have you heard of India? It's on the if you're looking at a map directly, it's on the bottom right-hand corner of India. Size-wise, Bangladesh is about the same size as Pennsylvania. A little bigger, a tiny bit bigger than Pennsylvania. Any idea how many people live in Pennsylvania? I'll give you the answer. You have about 13 million people who live in the state of Pennsylvania. Bangladesh is about the same size as Pennsylvania. Any idea how many people live in Bangladesh? So 260, that's tough. 166 million people live in the same, that's 13 times as many people who live in Pennsylvania live in the same geography. And more than a quarter of the people who live in Bangladesh live below $2 a day. And that is the environment in which my parents were born, in which I was born. My father was born in a small remote village in Bangladesh, with no bathrooms. They had outhouses. They had one river in which they showered, and it was also the drinking resource for the entire village. He was the only person in his family to leave that village and go to Saudi Arabia as what we now know as migrant workers. So he would go to Saudi Arabia, he would work there on construction projects, and all throughout the Middle East, Kuwait, Lebanon, and he settled in Saudi Arabia. A few years later, he was able to move my family, when I was 3, to Saudi Arabia. I have a brother and a sister, both who went through the Norristown Area School District. And while in Saudi Arabia, our journey to the US actually started at a mall. So most of us grew up right here in Norristown, right near the King of Prussia Mall. The way I like to tell the story is, while we were walking around the mall, you see all of these kiosks, whether to sign up for a fancy car or get your bathroom remodeled. While we were walking around the mall in Saudi Arabia, we ran into a kiosk that said, sign up for the US. So my parents, none of them had graduated high school. They filled out the forms. And 6 months later, we get a call from the US Embassy in Riyadh, which is the capital of Saudi Arabia, saying, you had won the lottery to go to the US. We were excited. At that time, that lottery system was called the Diversity Visa Lottery. You may have heard a little bit about it because the new president is planning to end that lottery system. So we were really fortunate because we had won the lottery. So we go to Riyadh, we get our interviews, and everything is set. Our flight is scheduled for September 11th, 2001. Now my last name's Hussein. So you had the Hussein family traveling from Saudi Arabia to JFK on 9/11. There are a lot of points in my life where you would consider either divine intervention or inherent luck that decides where I ended up at the next trajectory of my life. And that was a moment when that happened. The apartment that we lived in, our lease expired on September 8th. So if we stayed for those 3 extra days, we'd have to pay for the entire month. And my parents were cheap people. So they decided, you know what, we're gonna leave a little early. And we actually ended up arriving through JFK on September 9th, 2001. We're very fortunate in that sense. So the way the US immigration works is anytime you're coming to the US from a foreign country, you need some type of sponsor. Somebody to say, I will take care of this person so they don't become a burden on the welfare system. But at that point, my parents didn't know anyone in the US, and the whole idea behind the diversity lottery was that we as a country are bringing in people who have no access to the American dream. So the sponsorship was not necessary. But since we didn't know anyone, my father had paid his boss's son's friend who lived in New York to help us resettle once we got here, because we didn't know anyone. So he paid this person. We show up at JFK on September 9th, and there's a person holding up a sign with our last name on it. We go to this person. We get in this nice big stretch black limo, and the idea was we would go to this person's house. But instead, we ended up at a motel in New Jersey. And the person said, well, why don't you rest for the night? Mr. So-and-so will come meet you tomorrow. Tomorrow shows up, and no one's there. The day after tomorrow, we all know as a day in American history, was 9/11. And there was chaos. You had this random Muslim family stuck in New Jersey at this motel, and we had no idea what to do. A few days go by, our money is running fast because the dollar to real conversion is almost close to 5 to 1. So our money was going by 5 times as fast. And we didn't know anyone here. My father was a prideful man. He didn't want to become a burden on the welfare system. So we decided, you know what? We would go back home to Bangladesh. We couldn't go back to Saudi Arabia because my father had left his job and everything like that. So we decided to take one last walk around Jersey to figure out what America was like. I was 9. We ran into an Indian restaurant. We were really excited because we haven't had ethnic food in a while. Indian food and Bengali food are pretty similar. So we walk into the restaurant. My father starts talking to the manager, who says, I might know someone in Philly who might be able to help you. So he calls his brother-in-law who lives in Norristown. And his brother-in-law drives from Norristown to Jersey picks up my family and moves us to a motel on Main Street, right next to that Sunoco. You guys know what I'm talking about? It's called the Budget. It used to be called the Budget Inn Motel. So we stayed there for about a week or so, but in that process, this man that we didn't know helped my father get a job, got us an apartment on West Washington Street, you know, those apartments on Washington Street, and enrolled us in school, in various different schools. I was at Whitehall, and so are my siblings. And he did all of that just because of humanity, this idea that someone was in need and he wanted to help them. And since then, my father started working 3 minimum wage jobs to support my family. He used to work at the In-N-Out food store on Main Street, on Markley Street. You guys know what I'm talking about? Right near Roosevelt Field. And then he would walk home after that to Washington Street, about 1.5 mile walk, because he didn't have a car. And then he would go to his second job from 3 to 11 at a light bulb factory on West Washington Street, the Fargo Assembly Factory. It's still there right near the Schuylkill River. So, and then on the weekends, he would do construction. So he was an extremely hard worker. He was trying to realize this American dream here in Norristown. Unfortunately, he passed away 3 years after we arrived from a heat stroke. And that was a big decision point again for my family. Again, divine intervention or inherent luck, whatever you call it. At that point, we had to decide what to do. And that's when the Norristown community again kicked in to help my family. My mother barely spoke English. I was in 8th grade at Stewart, and my father was the main bread earner for the family, and he was gone. And that's when the elders of the community, some of the people from the school district, they went and pretty much gave my mom an option. It was, if you wanted to go back to Bangladesh, they would help us pay for our tickets and pay off our debt. But if we wanted to stay in the US, they would help pay for our rent until we can get back on our feet. I'm standing here today because of the Norristown community and because of my mother, who decided that she wanted to realize the American dream that my father had for my family and me. At that point, I picked up a job at that Sunoco on Main Street. I was 14. And then my mother started working at that light bulb factory. So every day I ran track for Norristown High, and then I played soccer for them in the fall. But I would come home from practice, and then I would go to work until 11, and then I would do my homework on the side. Came time to graduate high school, I had no intention of going to college. I was making good money, supporting my family, and that's what I wanted to continue to do. I had promoted myself from that Sunoco to that 7-Eleven on Main Street, Main and Marshall, and I was making $7.25 an hour. And my manager told me if I graduated high school, he would pay me $10 an hour. So I was excited because I was going to bring in a lot more money to support my family. But I had this guidance counselor at the high school who did not want that to happen. His name was Mr. Hadrick. And there are some of you in the room who may recognize Mr. Hadrick, and he still does a lot of work with the NAACP, and I work with him on a few of the political stuff in the city. But Mr. Hadrick said, you are going to be the first kid from Norristown in the last 5 years to go to a place called Harvard University. I had no idea what Harvard meant. I knew it was in Boston, and Boston was too far from Philly, and I said, I'm not going there. So he took out a map. And he was like, all right, how far are you willing to go? I told him, I don't know, maybe an hour, tops. And he made a circle of a diameter of an hour. And he made me apply to every single one of those schools within that circle. He helped me with my essays. He helped me get all the recommendations from my teachers here at the high school. And then I ended up getting into a lot of those good schools. I ended up going to a school called Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, because of his help on a full scholarship. And there I did fairly well. I was the university's first Truman Scholar, and then I went off to work for President Obama for about 2 years in the administration as an intern and then in various different offices. And then I came back home to go to law school, and right now I'm at the University of Pennsylvania Law School in my 3rd year finishing up. And I share my story with you not to give you a feel-good narrative or to, give you another story of the usual American dream, but because I truly believe that within my story, there are lessons to be learned for us as a community on this day of remembrance and service, and for our march as a community forward. And for me, those lessons are threefold. And those are lessons that we've been learning for a while, but also lessons of Dr. King. And the first lesson is that service should be blind. And what I mean by that is the greatest promise of America lies within the belief that each individual can succeed and get to that other point, no matter his race, religion, skin color. And I mean that because when it didn't matter when my family was in need, what my religion was in this school. It didn't matter what my skin color was. What mattered was that someone was in need, and a community like ours stood up to take care of that family. And because of that, I am where I am today. So that's lesson number one. Lesson number two is that for the older adults and the teachers and educators in the room, is that access and visibility also matter. So I wouldn't be where I am without someone pushing me and people encouraging me to keep going and get to that next step. Without someone screaming in my ear, yes, you can. And because of that, I was able to get through all of the different positions that I've had in my career today. I didn't necessarily have anyone who looked like me to come back to school and say, yes, you can, and you can continue to do that. And I was really impressed today to see the people, alumni back today, to continue giving back to the students. And that's where the difference happens, is when people like us come back to the communities, but also people like you and the educators pushing those students to tell them that they can continue to do that. And the third lesson is that perspective matters. And what I mean by that is I have had an incredible life. And if you Google me, you'll get a lot of, really good looking photos of me, but you'll also see that, there's been close to 50 to 100 articles written about me. And those articles can range from the Inquirer to the New York Times to the CNN, but all of those articles focus on that little aspect of that, brown Muslim kid who had made it out of nowhere and now is at the highest strata of his career. But what we tend to forget is that perspective matters. I work in a lot of my legal work. I work with immigrants and refugees all the time. And I see stories of war, hunger, and violence, only to realize that although I have come from a different end of the world, there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And we as a community can do that. At certain point, divine intervention or inherent luck is not going to change the trajectory of where our society is headed. I truly believe that my story and our story together is proof that community engagement will continue to push forward our society. And we can continue to do that. Dr. King said that life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? I urge you to answer that question through your actions. We can't sit back. So I hope that you will continue to march with me, provide access, be visible, and then ultimately challenge what's wrong, as we learned today. And in the process, remember what President Obama said 2 years ago, is that because he marched, because they marched, America took a step forward. America changed. Because they marched, the Civil Rights Law was passed. The Voting Rights Law was signed. Because they marched, doors of opportunity and education opened so that our sons and daughters would have a life beyond washing dishes and laundry for someone else. Because they marched, city councils changed, state legislatures changed, Congress changed, and yes, eventually, the White House changed. Because they marched, America became more fair, not just for African Americans, but for women and Latinos, for Catholics and Jews, for Muslims and gays. America changed for you and me, and the entire world drew strength from that. This is indeed a dark time for our country, a time of divisiveness. But to secure the gains that this country has made requires constant vigilance, not complacency. Yes, we will suffer the occasional setback, but we will win these fights. This country has too much grit and has come through too much and changed so much for us to turn back our backs now. This is the greatest transition for our country, and that transition and moments like that happen in places like our community, in rooms like this one here today, where we all come together and think about how we continue to push our community forward. So I thank you for having me here with you and to share in this important moment, and I hope you'll join me in keep pushing our community forward. Thank you.
I have a question. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How influential was your second job on your ability to work in school? Like, do you think it's important for kids to have a job? I think it's important for kids to have a job, so I'm throwing that out to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think working while in high school, I started in middle school. I think working is incredibly important to get some of the, one, to keep your pocket full, but then two, to gain some of the skills you need in life and just interaction skills that you definitely need. And what's even more important is now, as I work with a lot of students who are applying to colleges, and beyond that, applying to high-level fellowships for graduate students. And some of the things that employers now and colleges now are looking for is that skill that you gain while you were younger. And those skills come from while you're working at these places. So there's a lot of value that employers and colleges put into students who are working. So when you are looking at a higher education application for colleges, there's a different strata of what counts for what. And public service and community service and all of that looks great. But for those students who can't meet all of that, schools are more and more looking into the types of work that you're doing outside of that. And I think for me, it has been incredibly helpful. My second job at that 7-Eleven and my first job at that Sunoco is that you not only gain those interaction skills with the people, but you're also gaining this next level resume building activity that you don't necessarily think about, but that counts a lot when you're at that step. So there's that. And I'm open to other questions too. Anyone? You gotta have something. Everybody's ready to go home?
So I was asking, as a person who speaks English as a second language, or somebody who's from an urban environment who's more comfortable speaking in idioms or using slang, can you just comment on maybe some of the language or linguistic politics in the environments that you work in? How important is it, or controversial, or just?
I think what she just hit on is this idea of code switching, right? It's this idea of code switching where I'm used to being in what people call very elite spaces, right? I was at the White House, then I was at the Homeland Security. Now I'm at UPenn Law, which is one of the top schools in the entire country. And you're constantly with people who think of talking in a way that's like very high level voice and speech. And then you come into, and then, for me, it's like switching back and forth in various different ways. One is when I go home, I'm speaking Bengali with my parents, right? And that's one type of code switching that I'm making. Then I go home to a lot of my Norristown friends who, some of them maybe not have graduated school, or some of them who are still in this area, and that level of speech is a little different. And the politics of that, naturally, there's been a lot of psychological articles that have been written about it, a lot of sociology studies that have been done on this idea of code switching. But the politics of it at the end of the day is that we do it without thinking about it. And that tends to happen often, but sometimes you catch yourself, right? I was talking to a friend the other day, and he was like, dude, you talk different now. I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean I speak different? And then all of a sudden I caught myself, right? The entire day I'm used to, and my friends are used to using the word talk to describe a discussion versus, and then I turned it on them. I was like, what do you mean I speak different? And sometimes those things, there's always a battle back and forth, but oftentimes it seems that we tend to do it without even recognizing it, and it's happening often back and forth.
Any other questions?
How did you manage being an athlete in school and then like school where you have a job?
Yeah, speak up a little louder.
How did you manage being an athlete and having a job and your schoolwork?
Sure. How did I manage being an athlete and doing well in school? Well, one, I wasn't that great of an athlete. No, but I think so there are three parts of it. I was an athlete, and I worked after school, and then I came and did my work. And a lot of it is about motivation and what you want to get out of it. For me, the biggest motivation was that my parents had made an incredible sacrifice to make sure where I was at that point, and I didn't want to let them down. Right? That was my motivating factor, to know that my parents went through this whole immigration system and got here. They're here for 10 years without seeing their parents ever, and all they wanted was to see a successful family, to see successful kids who are making moves. And that was incredibly important. And the other side was need, right? My family needed that money, therefore I needed to work. And so that part had to be done. In terms of athletics, it's something I wanted to do. That was part of my social upbringing, that was part of me making friends, and whether I was the best at it, I definitely was not, but I definitely wanted to be part of it. And that helped me grow a lot just as a person and as a member of those teams. Yep.
After Norristown saw you off and you went to Franklin and Marshall, was that an easy transition for you, or being alone and away from your family, there are times you felt like maybe you made the wrong choice?
Yeah, so first day I walked into F&M, I definitely thought I made the wrong choice. Moving into college is not a easy transition at all whatsoever. It doesn't matter what strata of socioeconomic status you come from, especially coming from Norristown as an immigrant kid. Going to a school like Franklin and Marshall College, most of my friends at F&M had parents who paid tuition fully. And Franklin and Marshall College cost $63,000 a year to attend. So, most of my friends had parents who could write checks for $63,000 a year and pay it off for 4 years in a row. And I came from a family where my parents made less than $30,000 a year. So that was, in terms of a shock for what a lifestyle is of the people that I was associating with daily, was incredibly different. The second part is the academics. It doesn't matter how well prepared you are from any school whatsoever. As soon as you go into college, the level of work that you're doing is incredibly different. The amount that is required of you to do is incredibly different, and that was something that you have to get used to. But the first shock you definitely get is the socioeconomic shock of being in a very white suburban space. And I guess the third shock is connected to that white space, is the shock of lack of diversity, right? F&M, Franklin Marshall College said, we have great diversity. And then you show up and you realize, I am the diversity that they were talking about. Like, I could count literally in my hands the number of black kids who graduated with me, in my class of 500 people. And that's another type of shock. So there's a continuum of different things that you feel shocked about, but there's no way that first semester was easy in any way. The only part that was easy in a sense was that I didn't have to pay for it, right? And so that's something that that's a stress level that wasn't there, but everything else was there for sure.
Yep.
What was it like working under such an influential person?
What was it like working under such an influential person? And I'm guessing you're talking about President Obama. So, I want to get something on the table. I never sat down and had coffee with President Obama. I was not his advisor for anything. I was the lowest person on the totem pole, starting off as an intern at the White House and then doing some work there. Was that it's, being in DC is different in and of itself, but working at the office, it's an incredible honor to be part of that system, but it's also really demanding and tiring too, because you're working not necessarily for the president, you're working for the American people. And anybody in public service who will come up to you is, you never get thanked for the good work you do, and you always get blamed for anything that goes wrong, even if it's not under you. A lot of my work was with the Office of Public Engagement and Intergovernmental Affairs, which means pretty much all of the local elected officials. It was my office's job to keep them happy. So every time there was a local elected official, and think about the size of the White House. The White House has about 400 or so paid employees, and everybody else, close to 1,000 people who work in the strata, everybody else works for free as an intern, a fellow, or something like that. But those 400 people serve a country of 300 million people. So a lot of my job at that point, and my office was 4 people. I was the intern, and then you had a director, an associate director, and a staffer. Our 4 people had to service every single elected official who ever came through DC and make them feel special, and host a lot of the events with the big 4, which were the president, the vice president, Dr. Biden, and Michelle Obama. So we were in rooms with those people often, but it was never, no one knew my name or anything like that. But it was an incredibly gratifying experience being able to walk the halls of history. Yeah, another one? I'm not going to walk to you this time.
I got 2 questions. One, as a young person who's fairly successful, do you have any rules or guidelines about social media use, or like put my phone down times where using my phone is not appropriate or necessary? And then also, you talked about your time at college, and you said it's a white space, and then you said you can count on your hands how many black people graduated with you. So do you feel, as an immigrant in this country, that there are just 2 cultural or societal norms in terms of race, one being black, the other being white, and then being an immigrant, you just gotta kind of fit in either or?
All right, I'll try to answer the last question first, and then the social media one second. So oftentimes I think I got really lucky, right? I often get asked, like, how do you assimilate it so quickly into the culture? And I was like, I wasn't black, nor was I white, so there wasn't an expectation for me, and this is a crass way of saying this, but for me to act a certain way, right? There's a societal perception of how a black person is supposed to act, or how a white person is supposed to act, and you tossed me in the middle, and it was like I could easily function back and forth between some of those groups. And I want to say, at some point, I think because of that societal perception, I've taken advantage of that in some ways that probably a lot of other people lack. And now my life's goal is to try to figure out how we can bridge those gaps, right? There's a reason, I think, at the end of the day, Mr. Hadrick took a liking to me versus my 500 classmates who were in Norristown. And unfortunately, it was probably because I was not black, right? Or I wasn't white. And then as you keep continuing on in life, you see those advantages and disadvantages come back and forth. And I do think there are serious issues in society in terms of preconceptual perceptions that we have of one another, right? When I walk into a room, and depending on how I introduce myself, or if I'm sending an email to someone, right? If I email someone and I say, oh, I'm a Norristown area high school grad, there's a way that they think about me. If I email someone and I say, oh, listen, I'm part of the Muslim Student Association at the law school, there's a way people think about me. But if my signature line says former White House intern or UPenn law grad, there's a different way someone thinks about me. And I think the biggest challenge of our generation is trying to figure out how to bridge that type of thinking. And those things, we can't do alone, right? There's a societal changes that have to happen, but I believe changes like that happen in spaces like Norristown, where you walk in and the diversity you see in Norristown and in cities like Philadelphia, it's incredible the type of learning we get in schools like this, just societal learnings. So that's one. In terms of social media, I'm pretty active on social media, especially Facebook. Everybody add me on Facebook. I need more friends. But some of the rules that I follow in social media is I try not to post too much personal information about me on social media. When it comes to employment and jobs, and I've been on both sides of hiring people and applying for jobs in that sense, people check social media. Employers go into social media and look what you're up to. And as sad as it is, that is your personal profile to the world. So I try to keep my social media as private as possible in all of the settings. So whatever I post are for my friends. I try to keep it as professional as possible in terms of what I post. A lot of things I post about are my political beliefs and things like that, but I never try to get into fights or anything on social media. It's probably not worth it, and you don't need your employer or your friends seeing that. Whatever you put on social media, it's there. It's not going away. Someone's collecting it. It's always there. So just be careful about what you're putting out there, especially as social media becomes more accessible to younger populations. And my sister's 7 now, and she already knows how to get on. She doesn't have an account, but she knows what Facebook is. So like these conversations, I think we need to have earlier and earlier with our kids about how to present ourselves on that space. Any other questions? Looks like we're good. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Akbar. We invited you here because you're from Norristown, not because you work for Barack Obama, but we are appreciative of that. And so just take from that story, I think it's so powerful. You're such a powerful speaker. Thank you so much. One more round of applause. A lot of personal stuff he shared. And you guys can see yourself in his success and just carry yourself as such. I wanted to just have one more shout out today to Principal Roth. Can you guys give him a round of applause? We've been doing this a long time, and you are the first principal who's ever come, and we really appreciate it. And for those of you kids who might not know him because he just got here, you finally have someone who's a champion for you. He walks around the halls. He's not afraid to get his hands dirty. He is not scared to talk about race and diversity. And that's not something that you're often going to see in a leader because sometimes they have to be more guarded. So I'm just going to speak for all the teachers here. We're really excited you're here. Thank you so much.